Okay, well, as we continue in the book of Job tonight, just a quick reminder on how it's outlined. We're in the second section now, finished with the first section where it talks about how Job is afflicted and all the various sufferings that came upon him. And then in chapter 3, we begin to look at, here's Job having lost everything, lost his life, his wealth, his children, and his health. And then he has these three friends show up. And we talked about those three friends and their characteristic, and all three of them have really the same argument voiced in their own unique way. But the argument comes down to, Job, you are suffering because you've done wrong. There's something you've done wrong, and until you get that fixed, you're going to continue to suffer. So Job, we're really going to comfort you by helping you find out what your flaws are. And that's where we're at right now. And then the third section will be God's answer to the whole thing, where He clears it up. And we were talking this night, just tonight with some friends, and talking about how, what's the purpose to Job, and when should you read Job, and what's the value to it. And somebody mentioned, well, Job is... I've always been told when you're hurting, read Job. But it doesn't seem like a good book to read when you're hurting. And that's a pretty common feeling. I think Job is not as useful for those who are hurting, because as you read through Job, in general, you're going to say, yeah, I already feel that way. I don't need anybody to tell me about it. I don't need somebody to tell me they've got it worse, because there's one of the least useful things when you're really suffering is to have somebody say, yeah, but that guy over there's got it worse. Well, that doesn't do me any good, because I got it bad enough anyways. So now I am bad, and I feel bad for having it bad. But Job is really useful for us as we look at people who are suffering, because the vast majority of the book is Job trying to tell his friends, please, please, please give me some comfort. And you're not doing it right. I need something to take the pain away. I need something from you, my friends, to help me, and you're not giving it. And so as we go through, that's really one of the best ways to look at Job. There's multiple things to get out of Job, of course, but one of those things that we should look at is, what is it that a man who suffered so deeply really needed from his friends? And so we kind of keep that in mind as we function in the role of comforters. So in chapter 8, we had Bildad's first argument, and we covered that. And Bildad's argument was harsher than his friends. It was harsher than Eliphaz's. We brought up verse 4 where he makes a statement. He says, if your sons have sinned against him, he has cast them away for their transgression. Bildad literally says, well, Job, your kids died because your kids were bad, and God got rid of the bad kids. So that's the way it goes. They sinned, and God cast them away for it. And in chapters 9 and 10, Job replies to Bildad, and I believe this is where we left off. In Job 9, verse 22, it says, it is all one thing, therefore I say, he destroys the blameless and the wicked. If the scourge slays suddenly, he laughs at the plight of the innocent. Now, Job 9, what he's doing is he's talking about God. And so, as we've said before, there's so many chapters in Job, we're trying to grab the essence of everything that's said. And in Job 9, as Job is replying to Bildad, he makes this statement that, look, you say my children were killed because they sinned. You say I'm hurting because I've sinned. And Job says, look, I'm suffering because to God it's all one thing. He just lumps us all together as one. He destroys the blameless and He destroys the wicked. If the scourge comes and it slays, if you have a sickness that comes through, well, who dies in the sickness? Good people and bad people. Now, the important thing to understand about this is, as Job is saying this, Job means it in not necessarily the best way. This is the problem we have with Job. This is why Job is such a frustrating book for us so much of the time. Is because you're looking at Job's friends and you say, they're wrong. and yet they'll say things that are right sometimes. One of Job's friends will say, God punishes the wicked, and that's why the wicked suffer. And is that true? Does God punish the wicked? Yeah. Do the wicked ever suffer for their wickedness? Yes. So you say, now wait a second. These three guys are wrong, and yet they just said something that was right. And then you take it on the flip side of it, and you look at Job, and Job's the good guy. And Job is going to make arguments, and you'll agree with him over and over and over again. Say, no, that's right, that's right, that's right. And then, now we're starting to hit this section about chapter 9, where Job will begin to say some things, and you'll go, well, Job, I'm not so sure that one's quite right. Now, yeah, that's true, but... Now, Job's point with this is, God just doesn't care. God takes the innocent and the wicked, and He lumps them together, and bad things happen to them to both, and it's just all one thing to God. It's just a blanket statement about mankind. He just lets all of us hurt. Now, it is true that everybody hurts, but does God just randomly just let people hurt? Does He just, treat us all the same whether you're good or bad? He doesn't care one way or the other? No, now that's not true, Job. And so I have here, we've got to remember this book isn't as simple as Job is right and his friends are wrong. There are things Job doesn't understand. Look at this next thing. In verse 24 of chapter 9, he says, the earth is given into the hand of the wicked. He covers the face of its judges. If it is not He, who else could it be? Now Job says, look at this whole thing. God just lumps them all together. Everybody suffered. He laughs at the plight of the innocent. God just looks at that innocent people suffering and just laughs at it. Just kind of like, we might laugh at an anthill. When you have an ant and it's struggling to get up a hill and it's got a little breadcrumb on its head, and that ant's trying to get up that hill and you see it and it'll fall over. Grab the crumb, fall over. What do? Look at that. Look at that funny little ant. He can't make it into the hill. That's what Job says. He says that's the way God treats us. And he says, God just has given the earth into the hand of the wicked, and He covers the face of the judges. If you cover a judge's face, what happens? No justice, right? He says there's no justice. And then he says, if it's not He, if it's not God, who else could it be? Now there's one thing Job doesn't know. Job doesn't know about that conversation with Satan, does he? Now you and I can look at that and you say, who made Job to suffer? Who hurt Job? Who took all of Job's things away? We go back to chapter 1. Who was it? Satan did it. But Job doesn't know that. Job doesn't have the full picture. Job just looks and he says, righteous people are hurting, and all I can figure is that it's like God looking at a little ant fall down a crevice, and He just doesn't care. And if it's not God, then who could it be? Well, there's an answer to that, but Job doesn't understand it. And so as we go through, we have to keep this in mind, and like I said, this is what makes this book confusing, is it would be a lot easier if you just knew when I read what Job says, that's the right thing, and when I read what his friends say, that's the wrong thing. But it's not as clear-cut as that. You've got to go through the whole book before you get really the ultimate clear picture. Anybody have any questions so far? Okay, well, let's move on to chapter 11. Now, chapter 11, we're going to see Zophar and his first argument. Now, in the list of Job's friends, I said, remember what happens with each friend as you go through? They get a little bit meaner. This guy's the last one, so what's his argument going to be? Going to be the meanest argument. And so, look here in chapter 11, verse 3. He says, should your empty talk make men hold their peace? And when you mock, should no one rebuke you? Now this is how he starts in with Job. Should your empty talk make me be quiet? Job, you're talking and all it is just vanity, vanity, vanity. You have no wisdom. You just got an empty head, Job. And you expect me to listen to your just hot air and be quiet. And when you mock, you just sit here and you mock everything good and righteous. You think I should just sit here and not rebuke you? So that tells you, that's the way he starts his conversation. So here's Zophar, and he's going to speak, and he's going to come out swinging, isn't he? He's not going to start like Eliphaz did, where he says, Job, you've done a lot of good things, but there's a problem over here. It's got to be. No, he's just going to say, Job, you are a bad guy, and you're speaking foolishness, and you've got an empty head. Verse 12, for an empty-headed man will be wise when a wild donkey's colt is born a man. So you have a wild donkey, and it has a colt. So whenever a wild donkey gives birth, how many times does it give birth to a man? Never, right? And so it's like saying, when pigs fly. He says, an empty-headed man will be wise when pigs fly. You get what he just said to Job? Job, you got no brains. You got rocks for brains, buddy. And so that's the kind of attitude he's taking with Job. Now, the reason he's got that attitude, before we say, I would never, ever, ever talk to somebody when they're hurting like that, I want you to check yourself. Because when you're talking with other human beings, you'll have times where you miscommunicate with each other, won't you? Even with your spouse, maybe. And they're trying to say one thing, but you're hearing another. And so over here, all they want you to do is accept them or listen. Or how many times have we ever heard this, men, right? I just want you to listen. And we're there trying to fix the problem. And so we say things, and then when that other person you're having a conversation with, here it is, a coworker, whoever it is, when they don't just get it, what happens to you? You get frustrated, don't you? And so you start saying, you empty-headed. Now you're going to say it differently than that, but you'll say something like that. That's what Zophar did. Here's Job, and he's saying, I haven't done anything wrong. I haven't sinned. If I've sinned, explain it to me, but I love the Lord, and I just don't see how it could be anything other than the fact that God He just doesn't care. Now, he hears that, and Zophar hits the roof. How dare you say God doesn't care? How dare you say, you trying to tell me you're more righteous than God? And so that's how he starts talking. Now we just got to be aware that frustration can happen with us too. And so we have to be very careful, especially when somebody's hurting. They're going to say things that make no sense to you. Because anytime somebody suffers, they say things that don't make sense. They don't even make sense to them. You talk to people who are really hurting, and they'll say things, and they'll say it, and then 5 seconds later they go, I know that's not true. I know, but they said it anyway, didn't they? And so you've got to just prepare yourself to be patient and to be slow to speak. Otherwise, you'll end up being Zophar whether you like to or not. Okay? Verse 16 and 17, he says, because you would forget your misery and remember it as waters that have passed away, and your life would be brighter than noonday. I like this one too, because here in chapter 11, Zophar, he says, Job, you are an idiot. You're empty-headed. You are mocking God and mocking the truth, and I'm going to rebuke you. And then he says, Job, if you'll just get your act in order, if you will just stop sinning, if you'll just start smiling instead of whining all the time. That's another thing. When you're not suffering and somebody else does, you look at some other human being and they're suffering and you're not, it's real easy to just say, get over it, isn't it? Oh, come on, just smile. Be happy. Just get up and make your bed and get about life, and it'll be fine. And that's exactly what he says. He said, Job, just get your life in order. If you would forget your misery and remember it as waters that have passed away. We have a saying very similar to waters that have passed away. What do we say? Water under the bridge. Look, Job, everything that's happened in the past, if you just forget your misery and treat it like water under the bridge. Just get up today, Job. Just stand right up and smile and put on a good face. Forget about your dead children. Forget about all the flocks and herds you lost and the homes and the servants. Just forget all about that and just start new. Now, Zophar's right, but he's also wrong. If we could do that, wouldn't that be a great thing? If Job could just stand up and just say, I'm just going to get my act together. You're right, Zophar. I'm just going to smile. I'm going to smile. I'm going to be happy, and I don't know why I was so miserable. I should have gotten this together. That would be great if you weren't human. And so here is our tendency. Zophar's impatient. That's what I want you to see. He's an impatient man. Job, just snap out of it, buddy. And it don't work that way. Zophar insults Job and then explains to him he just needs to get his act in gear and change his attitude. And so there's chapter 11 is really Zophar's argument. Job, you've sinned. You paid the price of sin. Now just get your act together and start being righteous. Smile, water under the bridge, and then your life will be brighter than noonday. Just move on. Job's answer, I am one mocked by his friends. Remember how Job said earlier, boy, I'm so glad you guys have come to comfort me. Here it is, I'm hurting, I'm suffering, and Zophar, I'm so glad that in my misery and sorrow, you came to tell me that I just needed to smile, because I hadn't thought of that. I hadn't considered that was all I needed to do. And so he says, I'm one mocked by my friends. And then he goes farther in chapter 13, verse 4. He says, but you forgers of lies, you are all worthless physicians. Oh, that you would be silent and it would be your wisdom. You would do me a lot better if we went back to how we were the first 7 days. Remember what they did the first 7 days? They just sat there and didn't say anything. He says, oh, that you would be silent and that would be your wisdom. If the wisdom you had to convey to me was just keeping your mouth shut, I'd be a lot happier. And so we go back and forth with this kind of battle of words between Job and his friends. Anybody have any questions or comments on that before we move forward? Okay, chapter 14. Now in chapter 14, Job is continuing to answer his friends, but he kind of takes a little bit of a tangent. And we see this happen quite a bit. And in this tangent, he's going to talk about death. And he's going to talk about his attitude towards death. And this is a really interesting chapter because as you look at Job's attitude towards death, you're looking at a man shaped by suffering. So it's just like going to a river, and you look at a river and you see how smooth those stones are. You know, river stones all smoothed out. Well, what made that stone all smooth and these other ones all pointed and abrasive? Those rocks were shaped by water. Now Job, his attitude toward death is not like your attitude towards death. It's just totally different. It is 180 degrees different than the average person's. You say, well, why? Because Job has been shaped by suffering. And so it's going to tell us something about what suffering does to people. One thing he's going to say in chapter 14 is he says, you have appointed his limits so that he cannot pass. Job's going to say, God, I figured out something, that you have a limit to a man's life, and he can't go beyond that. Whatever limit you set, that's where I'm at. I have no strength to just go out and do something on my own accord if you don't want me to do it. Now I want you to think about for a second how different that is than the average American attitude. The average American is taught you can do whatever you want. The sky's the limit. You can make anything with your life. You can change and shape your life in any way, shape, and form you want. We talk now where we can extend life, right? Isn't that what we talk about with medicine and things? And we're going to get to a point, and they'll say it every once in a while, boy, eventually modern medicine will get to a point where you can live 200-300 years. We can just extend life out. We are our own masters and commanders. That's the American way. Now look at a man shaped by suffering. I'm not in charge. Job had learned something. He'd had everything, and he lost it all, and he learned something in a way that you and I intellectually get, but don't get like somebody who suffered gets it. There's a limit. And if God doesn't want me to go there, I'm not going there. And if God wants me to go here, I'm going here. And my life will be shaped as He sees fit. And I'm going to just have to learn to accept that. I'm going to have to learn to accept what my Master has made for me. He's the Master and Commander. I'm just along for the ride. It says, man who is born of woman is of few days and full of trouble. Now once again, how is it that the average person is taught to view life? You have a child growing up and getting bigger and bigger, and we tell them, don't worry, someday you'll be 30 and wish you were dead. Is that what we tell little kids? So, no, we tell them, you have great days ahead of you. Wonderful things. Exciting times. This life is a good life. You can enjoy the blessings of it. Now here's Job, and he says, man is born and his life is short. He doesn't have much time here, and it's full of trouble. In this life, you're going to have lots and lots of heartache. It says, for there is hope for a tree if it is cut down, that it will sprout again. It says, now, if you take a tree and you cut it down to the ground, I've got a tree out in my backyard that I've de-limbed, and I'm going to take the stump and I'm going to cut it all the way down to the ground. Then when I've cut that stump, so all I have is a stump, the first thing I'm going to do is paint stump rot on it. You know why? Because if I don't do it, I'm going to have another tree. And it's going to start all over again. So you say, you cut down a tree and there's hope for the tree. Now if I take JP over there and I say JP's growing up and I de-limb him and I cut him off, do I have to put stump rot on him? There's one thing I know about JP, he's done. There is no hope for JP. He's got one shot at this life. That's it. And so another thing that a man who's suffered has learned is you're only going to go on this journey one time, aren't you? I'm only going to travel here in this life one time. And there is no hope in this life for me. Now, the end of that story is there is no hope in this life for a man, but there is hope. But where's that hope? In the next life. See, I have no hope in this life. If I die here, there's no hope. When I'm done here, I'm done. But there is hope later. And this is something Job has learned. He just said, I have learned as I have suffered and I have heard, I have learned that my hope is not here. Whereas when things are prosperous, you really do think of your life as having hope here, don't you? When you got family and wealth and prosperity and health, where's your hope? It's right here. I'm looking forward to tomorrow. I'm looking forward to that vacation we've got. I'm looking forward to seeing the kids grow up and then having grandkids on my lap. And I'm looking forward to this life. Now, when we're in prosperity in life, that's what we look forward to. But when we suffer, we're reminded, wait a second, the only real hope I've got is not in this life. Another thing he says, if a man die, shall he live again? All the days of my hard service, I will wait till my change comes. Now, when he says, till my change comes, what does he mean? When Job dies, he says, I will change. Now that sounds exactly like the New Testament teaching on the subject, doesn't it? When you die, in a twinkling of an eye, Paul says, what will happen? We will be changed. This man's hope is in heaven. Now, what made that hope in heaven? What put his hope in heaven? Shaped by that suffering, just like those rocks, shaped by that river. And so here's Job, and he says, all my days of my hard service, remember how he said, few days full of trouble. All my days of hard service, I will wait, and I will wait, and I will wait till I am changed. That is not the way we think, but that is the way suffering shaped this man to think. Look in the New Testament, and you see multiple verses on this idea. 2 Corinthians 4:16 says, wherefore we faint not, but though our outward man is decaying, yet our inward man is renewed day by day. Job specifically even makes that point that he says, my flesh is rotting off of me, which is a really wonderful picture, really, isn't it? I mean, just, my flesh is just decaying. It's rotting off of me. Well, Paul says that to the Corinthians. He says, we know our outer man is decaying, but what's happening to the inner man? Renewed day by day. You're going to see this, and at the end of it, you're going to say, now, Job, your body may never fully recover from all of that suffering you go through. This life has been permanently marked by what you went through. And we're going to see Job's going to have better days in this life, but these things mark his life and his outer man. And I'm sure Job would have been able to say, see, here's this scar that I bear from when I was sick. And over here I've got a scar too. His outer man's decaying. But what's happening to his inner man? At the end of this, Job will be a healthier inner man than he is starting it. Luke chapter 15 tells you about suffering from another standpoint. You have the story of the prodigal son. Story of the prodigal son, you have the son, and dad's a very prosperous man. And the son says, Dad, I see all this wealth, and I want my section, and I want it right now. Right? He says, Dad, give me my inheritance right now. So he takes it, and he goes off, and he lives the high life. And then what happened to him? It's all gone. And all his friends, who were his friends for his money, all went away. And we find him at his lowest point, feeding pigs and looking at the pig slop and saying, boy, I'd like to eat that. And it was only in that deep suffering that he did what? He said, my dad. I want to go back to my dad. Suffering changed that prodigal son, and it made him one who wanted reconciliation. He wanted to make things right with his father. So here we look at Job, and you look at the way a man thinks when he's been shaped by suffering. You see it in Job, you can see it in the prodigal son, you can see it in Paul, man who was beaten and stoned, half dead. And what did every single one of them find? Suffering shaped them so that all of a sudden they said, I want what's over there. Not over on the other side of the fence, but over in another world. Over on the other side of death. I want and I wait to be changed because that's where my real hope is. Anybody have any questions on chapter 14? Okay. Now we're moving to chapter 15 through 25. Now that's a big, big section. And we're actually going to go through it, and then we're going to come back and look at Job. Because Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar are all three of them going to talk some more. They each have some more arguments. Eliphaz and Bildad have 2 more times where they'll talk. Zophar's got 1 more time where he'll talk. Now I could go through and we could just kind of keep breaking down, every argument chapter by chapter, but their arguments are going to all wrap up to the same thing. There's not going to be any change in the way they talk. So we're going to summarize their arguments. We're going to summarize what it is that they had to say so that we can then say, okay, I get it. I have a picture of what they were saying to Job, and then we can go back and look through these chapters at what Job had to say and pick up some of those important elements of what Job is saying. So we can pick up some of those things. So does that make sense? Anybody have any questions on that? So we're going to summarize these guys, and then we'll look through these same chapters and look at the wisdom Job had and some of the lack of wisdom Job had, some of the things he said wrong. Okay, let's look at Eliphaz first. As we look at Eliphaz, he's going to say several different things. One of the things he's going to say in chapter 15 is he's going to say, yes, you cast off fear and restrain prayer before God. He's going to turn to Job, and one of his arguments, he say, Job, you're not afraid of God. If you were really afraid of God, then you'd admit your sin. The reason you don't think you've sinned is because you're not really afraid of God judging you. You just think, oh, I'm a good man, and I've got everything squared away. And so you don't have any fear of meeting God. He says, you cast that off, which Is that true? No. Job has fear of God. Job was a man that God very much said was a righteous man who feared Him. And he says, and you restrain prayer before God. You just think God doesn't care. You think God won't do anything. Now, that may be one part where he's kind of right. And what I mean by that is, as Job is talking and as we see him going through, Job will make some statements where we go, like I told you, you're going to wince a little bit, go, ooh, Job, I like you, but I think maybe you crossed a line there. And one of the things that he's already begun to say, and we've read a little bit of, and he's going to say even more is, God, I'm like an ant on an anthill, and I just don't matter to you. You just don't really care about me specifically, and it doesn't matter that I'm an innocent man suffering. It just doesn't matter to you. And so, of course, if Job continued with that argument, if you were to take Job's argument to its furthest extent, what would be the value in praying to God if He doesn't care? See, there's no value, is there? So Zophar says, you cast off fear. Well, no, Job's afraid of God. But he doesn't, he's in this depth of despair. And once again, can we blame Job that much? No, everything Job says is understandable. But there is a point where he kind of crosses a line and God will tell him, Job, you went too far here. And one of those is in this where he gets to a point where he says, look, I just don't think He cares one bit. He says, is it because of your fear of Him that He corrects you? Now this goes back to that argument. Every time somebody suffers, it's because God's correcting them. Is that true? Is every suffering a punishment for bad behavior? No. Now, is some suffering a punishment for bad behavior? Yes, but not all of it. And so, his argument is, Job, you say you fear God. Well, that's why He's correcting you, is because you're such a good guy. And it's that sarcasm again. Okay, there's a lot of that sarcasm within the book of Job, which is another thing that makes it tricky, because when you read sarcasm, when somebody tells you sarcasm, you can tell it's sarcasm, can't you? Tone. But when you read it, the tone's not there, and it can kind of come across funny if you're not careful. He says, now acquaint yourself with Him and be at peace. Job, I have one piece of advice for you. Just acquaint yourself with God. Just get to know Him a little bit and reconcile with Him and make your life right, and then you'll have peace. Well, we've already heard this argument, right? Nothing new. Same thing. Job, you've sinned. Job, you've done wrong. Get your act in order. Okay. Why does your heart carry you away, and what do your eyes wink at? Now, what this is Job, they've told Job, you have sinned. You've done a lot of things wrong. You've done something bad. I mean, obviously very bad, because I've never seen a man suffer like you, Job. You've done something really, really bad. And then Job will say, I haven't done anything. Show me what I've done wrong. Show me my sin. And this is what they tell him every time, because they couldn't find a sin in him. They're going to say, well, I don't know, but why does your heart carry you away, and what do your eyes wink at? See, Job, I don't know what your eye is winking at. See, when you wink, your eye closes, right? And so that phrase is, it's like saying, okay, if all of a sudden I don't want to see Lowell, so I'm going to start looking here, and then I don't want to see Lowell, so I just wink as I go across Lowell. Well, that's what they're saying. Job, we don't know what your sin is, but you're obviously winking at something. There is something in your character that you just don't want to own up to. You don't want to fess up and admit that you have a big sin. So I don't know what it is, buddy, but you're winking at it. You're blinding yourself to something you've done wrong. Now, do people do that sometimes? Absolutely. I think times in my life where I've winked at sin. I knew that I should have changed. I knew I should have gotten rid of that, but I winked at it. But is that true in this case? No, it's not true in this case. So once again, we run into this problem where here's these things, and do people wink at sin? Yes, but it doesn't apply here. So when somebody's suffering, if there's anything you learn from what these guys are saying, when somebody suffers, you should not go in and blanket make a statement about them, because I can only guarantee you one thing. Nobody is a one-size-fits-all sufferer. Nobody suffers for the same reasons. They may be suffering for sin, but even as Job said, even if somebody's suffering because of their sin, when they're really suffering, is that the best time to tell them they're a dummy? No. Maybe wait a little bit on that one. There may be a time for that, but not right now. And so, but just because somebody's suffering doesn't mean that they have sinned. Last thing we'll look at for him is he says, you have taken pledges from your brother for no reason and stripped the naked of their clothing. Now, he's going to go on and talk about how you took food away from widows and all these different things. Now, I point this one out because this is kind of an odd one. Well, what this is Eliphaz starts making up things that Job did wrong. He just starts saying, well, Job, if you want to admit it, you must have. And so he starts listing things that, I imagine a lot of very wealthy people do. Because Job was a very wealthy man, greatest man in all the East. So here's Job and a wealthy man, and in America, we see wealthy people steal money from other people all the time. We ever seen that on Wall Street, people stealing money from others? Oh, no, that never happens. Strip the naked of their clothing. You just take poor people, and they only have nothing, and yet somehow you find they're nothing, and you find something to take anyways. You ever seen poor people oppressed by the wealthy, by the rich? Yeah, just turn on the news. And so he lists all these things that are common sins for wealthy people, powerful people. And he goes, Job, you've been doing this, 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 and this. He just made it up. We know Job didn't do those things. But it's important for you to see that, because if you read it, you'll just scratch your head. You say, I didn't know that about Job. Well, Eliphaz didn't either. He's making it up because it's the only way to prove his argument, right? If his argument is true that the only reason we suffer is because of sin, then there has to be some sin in Job's life, so I'm just going to start making things up. Bildad. Look at Bildad. Remember, we're going to get just a little bit harsher than Eliphaz. Well, you look at the end there of Eliphaz, how harsh did he get? You steal from the poor and you take money from people. He got pretty bad. Bildad will be worse. Okay? Bildad says, why are we counted as beasts and regarded as stupid in your sight? He's going to start his arguments out by saying, Job, you think I'm dumb? Now, any argument that starts that way, any conversation that starts that way does not end well. You just try. Next time you decide to have a conversation with somebody, you try starting it out by saying, you think I'm dumb? And you see what it does to the conversation. That's how he starts it out. And he's going to talk about, look, do you think you can pull the wool over our eyes? He says, the light of the wicked indeed goes out, and the flame of his fire does not shine. Look, I know there's only one type of flame that God puts out. One type of life that he takes the joy out of. It's the wicked's light. He says, I know that, so don't we think I'm stupid? I'm not dumb. I'm not a beast. I'm not some animal of burden. I know your light's gone out, and it's because you're a bad man. So, here it is. Once again, Eliphaz at least said, well, Job, you've sinned, but maybe your eye's just winking at it. Maybe just humble yourself a little bit. I'm sure you can find what it is. Bildad, he didn't do that. He just says, look, you think I'm dumb? You're hiding something, buddy. You're lying to us, and you think you can pull the wool over our eyes? It's not going to work. I know God punishes the wicked, and you're obviously being punished. You're wicked. Then he also says, how then can man be righteous before God? Or how can he be pure who is born of a woman? Now, here he's going to take the argument one step farther. And what he's going to say here is he says, it's, Job, look, if you were really humble, you'd understand that nobody can live a good life. Now, in one sense, he's absolutely right. How many people are righteous? What does the New Testament say on that subject? None are righteous, no, not one. However, if somebody handed you a Bible and said, I'd like you to show me some righteous people in the Bible, could you show them some righteous people in the Bible? Well, yeah, I could. I'd show them lots of them. I'd just go over to Hebrews 11. I'll show you lots of righteous people. Well, what Bildad is doing is he's saying everybody's done wrong, and so it's impossible to be good. Now, we have a teach before you start saying that this is too far-fetched, because really what he's saying is, Job, no matter what you do, you've deserved this. You deserve all this punishment for sin because everybody sins and there's no way to be good, and so God's going to punish everybody, and everybody's just wicked to the core. Before you throw that argument out as really dumb, we've got an argument that's used in the religious world today just exactly the same. Why do you think they baptize babies? They baptize babies for something called original sin. Original sin means you are born with sin. You get it genetically. You get it from your grandpa and your great-grandpa and your great-great-great-grandpa all the way back to Adam and Eve. And so you are born in sin. And there's nothing you can do about it. Now, if you want to take that argument to its fullest, it's an argument called Calvinism. Calvinism is based off the idea of total depravity. I'm totally depraved. So if bad things happen to me, why do bad things happen to little babies? Because they're totally depraved. Why do little kids, why do they die? Because they're totally depraved. Nobody's righteous. Now, that doesn't match the Scriptures, though, does it? What did David say when his little baby died? He said, he won't come back to me, but I will go to him. What did David think about babies? They go to heaven. David didn't believe in original sin. And you talk about somebody, you talk about, John the Baptist. When John the Baptist was in the womb, he was filled with the Holy Spirit. So you mean to tell me the Holy Spirit went into this guy who had original sin? No. So we have to match what the Scriptures say and be specific about things. Has every adult sinned? Yes. None are righteous, no, not one. However, is it possible to live a righteous and faithful life where God will wipe out those sins and blot them out? Yes, it absolutely is. And thanks be to Christ who makes it possible. And if a baby is born, are they born with sin? No. When does sin happen? Sin's when I choose to do that which is wrong. It's not a genetic thing. And so, as we go through and look at Bildad, that's kind of the argument he finishes with as he goes, well, I don't know what sin you've done, Job, but look, everybody's sinful, so you're obviously suffering for something. And he takes it too far with that argument. And you could go so far as to say this is the first guy ever in the history of mankind to talk about total depravity. Anybody have any questions? Okay, we'll finish up there. Next week we'll look at Zophar's final arguments. And then what we'll do is we'll kind of summarize all the things that Job says in chapters 15 through 25, kind of lump them all together, hit some of the highlights there, and then we'll move into looking at Elihu, this fourth guy that's going to come into the picture, and look at what he has to say about things. Any questions? Okay, we'll close down there.